As globalisation spreads, the world gets smaller, making free trade across international borders an essential part of continued economic growth. But free trade can be a double-edged sword. The world has also become more dangerous, and since the events of September the 11th, governments have struggled to strike the right balance between security and trade facilitation.
In addressing security issues, there's always the danger that we put in place measures that achieve no additional security, just extra bureaucracy, therefore a penalty on the economy.
Customs in the 21st century must deal with three distinct areas: the collection of fiscal revenues, trade facilitation to promote economic growth, and the protection of a country's citizens and interests. And these functions must be harmonised on both sides of a border crossing.
Unless you actually go together, and unless you try to make it a joint undertaking, you end up duplicating things, you leave gaps, and you end up not going to the same direction and not facilitating at all.
And depending on a country's political, economic and commercial situation, governments will use customs in different ways.
If you look at the United States Customs, for example, they focus mainly on one function, which is the protection of its borders, the fight against terrorism, and also the protection of US interests abroad.
The US has ruffled a few political feathers by drawing up plans for a 7,000-kilometre fence along the Mexican border, and will be using gamma-ray scanning, biometric identification and electronic seals to keep an eye on who and what comes and goes. Since 9/11, Mexican customs have spent $300 million in technology upgrades to keep up with US demands. And that's another major issue faced by those agencies at work trying to sort out the problem.
If you talk about an organization like the WTO, where the large majority of countries are developing countries, or we have least developed countries, so certain things are just difficult to afford for them. So if you talk to them, they will tell you most likely that they would like to do certain things. They agree on it being a good thing, but it often comes down to who pays for it.
One way to reduce costs and improve facilitation is the effective use of existing technologies. And there are already mechanisms in place to provide the free flow of this information, such as the TIR Convention, an international transit system which allows registered carriers to transport goods from A to D without going through border checks at every point along the way.
What we would like to see is that, for example, the Americans, who are already signatories to the TIR system, use the TIR system, because what they're doing post 9/11 in terms of pre-notification, this information already exists within the TIR structure.
As it stands now, there are so many interested parties trying to find a solution that the danger is they become part of the problem, often duplicating the work instead of using these existing security tools.
Customs is not alone at the border, even though they are an important agency. But there are also other state agencies that intervene, and goods cannot come in or leave the border if they haven't been stamped by a series of civil servants from different agencies.
Total security can never be guaranteed, but the dilemma is that tightening security to the point where it halts the free flow of trade would in itself be a victory of sorts for the terrorists. Instead, the solution must come from reinforcing the cooperation between the public and private sector, so that information's kept flowing and harmonised border policies can work to help keep the goods moving.